to give us a quick reminder, if you want coffee, there's also some croissants and muffins and different things in the lobby, so feel free to grab anything before we get started in the next 4, 5, 6 minutes here, but there's some stuff in the lobby if you'd like to grab anything.
Of suffering brought me healing. He shed his blood to fill my soul. His crown of thorns made me royalty. His sorrow gave me joy untold. His life for mine. His life for mine. How could it ever be?
Does anyone need a handout? I want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. I think I got everyone. All right, and just one last reminder, if you want coffee or refreshments, you can grab that now or afterward, whatever's good for you. There's croissants, muffins, and some cookies out there, and then, of course, coffee to help us stay awake. So if you want to grab that now or after, you're welcome to grab it. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with things this evening. I've been trying to start no later than 35, so I'm a whole minute ahead here. It's 34. We have so much to cover tonight, and so as I mentioned last week, we will be getting through chapter 5 one way or another tonight, whether we actually get through it or whether we just say we're done with it. But we will be finishing simply for the sake of we only have 4 more weeks after tonight, and so we've got to get into chapter 6 and 7 and just allow ourselves some time there. I don't know about you. I hope that you have enjoyed, and not for the sake of like, oh, that was fun, or oh, I liked it, but that you've been helped. This has been very beneficial to me in going through and doing this study and preparing to present and having to dig in and read a lot and just to pour over it each and every week. And so I have enjoyed it immensely. So I hope that it's been a help and a blessing. I will say this, just a quick note. The handout tonight, it has 2 inserts. That is intentional. I didn't accidentally give you 2. There is a possibility that one of you has 3 because I'm missing one on my count here. So there's a chance that I gave somebody 2 of the same one. But you do have 2 different ones. The point of those is that I'm going to read a portion of those quotations, and then just if you want to read more of it, you can have it. We won't have time to read the entirety of those quotations. There's just a lot to cover. And so I want to allow you to have access to that material. And so that's just for you guys to look at and to utilize and to have a chance to see on your own time or tonight or whatever. But anyway, let's go ahead and pray, and we will get into tonight's lesson and tonight's thoughts, and hopefully, again, be benefited as we speed through, and we really will, speed through the rest of this chapter. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your goodness to us. Thank you for the opportunity to come together in this format, a little bit different than a collective service, a corporate service, just the chance to study your word, a little more laid back, and a chance just to learn and hopefully be helped and to grow, to be more like you, not to grow just in knowledge, but to be transformed by that knowledge. Lord, I ask that you would help me as I speak tonight to properly present what's in your word. I don't want to say just what I think or anything like that. I just ask that you would help me to do that properly and help to be a benefit to all of us here tonight and give us a good rest of the evening and safety as we travel home in a little while here. Thank you again for your goodness to us. Amen. All right, we'll get the music off here and jump right in from where we left off. So last week we got into this second portion. We went through the Beatitudes. Jesus then explains that he has not come to destroy the law, but rather to fulfill the law. And he begins to reteach certain aspects of the law. And that's where we left off last week, as he is reteaching the law from how it had been interpreted, how it had been presented, how it had been misrepresented, ultimately. And so this is where we're picking up. There are six times where he says, you've heard it said, but I say. It has been said, but I say. And so we only went through one of those last week, so we're going to go through 5 more tonight. And what that means is none of these will be exhaustive. We could spend probably an entire week on each of these just to really dive into the thoughts. We just won't have time for that. Chapter 6 awaits, as does chapter 7. And as I mentioned, this is our 4th week of 8, so we've just got to keep moving with this study. So let's pick up in Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. We're going to go all the way through verse 48, but I'm just going to read pockets of verses, deal with those, read the next section and deal with those, and so on and so forth. So let's pick up here in verse 27. And he says this, so he's continuing to teach the law. He's just finished talking about reconciling to your enemy and not having unprovoked anger and things like that with your brother and so on and so forth. So verse 27, he says this, you've heard it said, so here it is again, by them of old time. So this has been a long-standing teaching, that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. For it's profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. So he says the same thing again here. We'll stop at verse 30, and then the next one, it has been said, is in verse 31. So this first secondary heading, if you will, as we're going through a Christian's righteousness as the law is being taught, is on a very difficult topic, lust and adultery. Like, yeehaw, let's start here on a Sunday night. But we're just going through the passage. And so, again, it won't be exhaustive, but just to go through some thoughts on this. In the scribes and Pharisees' view, because he says, you've heard it said, and they were the teachers of the law at the time. They were the ones who were authoritative voices on the law. In their view, they and their pupils kept the seventh commandment, which is don't commit adultery, provided that they avoided the act. That was to them. That's all that the law covered, was that there was if I don't step over this boundary in action, I've not broken this commandment. Conveniently, this gives a very narrow definition of sexual sin. There's only one category, and that is if I step all the way over this boundary. It also conveniently gives a very narrow definition of sexual purity. And so there's this manipulation of the law. And so Jesus is here to correct this teaching and to set forth what the law means, because it's his law, because he's God. So interestingly, as they would teach this, they would just dismiss the 10th commandment, which is that you can't covet, which is the same thing, because one of the demonstrations of covet or illustrations is someone else's wife. And so they would find these loopholes, and we'll see a lot of that tonight as we go through each of these antitheses that he presents. So when Jesus taught the law as it was meant to be understood, it leaves a very, very simple application for all of us. Sin in the heart or mind is still sin against a holy God. So it's not just an action that is offensive. It's not just an action that violates, but rather what is inward also violates. And this is where he's beginning to make this application. It's not just an action, but it's the desire within. It's the heart behind the action that precedes the action. Jesus desires not just that we abstain from acts of sin, and in this case, he's illustrating sexual sin, but also that we abstain from thoughts and desires of sin. If you recall a really, really familiar text, Matthew 15, verse 19, Jesus says this, out of the heart. So this is from within, who each of us are. Out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, and then the first two he gives, murders and adulteries, which is what he's dealing with in the law here. Murders, adulteries, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemies. And he goes on to say, these are the things which defile a man. And so his point is, it's not just the actions that we take that defile us, but it's what's within that is also a violation of his law and defiles us. In the same way that Jesus considers anger, as we talked about last week, anger to be just as serious as murder, which again, that one's hard to reconcile. When we look at that, the way that he considers this to be a violation, and while it's not the act, it is still a violation for God. This is a problem for him in the law and the way Jesus interprets it. In that same way, he considers lust to be just as serious as the act of adultery. And so just kind of a way to characterize that or to capture that thought, we can commit murder with our words, and we can commit adultery in our hearts or our minds, and that's why he uses the word. He's already done it in his heart. Way back in the Beatitudes, this feels like ages ago, because we've had youth conference, and we've had vacation Bible school, and just busy life. So this feels like it was ages ago, but it's just a few weeks ago. We talked about the beatitude of being pure in heart. And the description that I gave with that was that it is not it's inward righteousness rather than rule righteousness. It's heart righteousness rather than rule righteousness. And this is what Jesus is reemphasizing both in this portion and all the portions to come, that it has to be something from the heart. Now, I want to be really clear. I don't think the principle he's teaching here is exclusive to men. He does demonstrate it with men, nor does it apply just to someone who's married. I have seen someone teach from this text that lust is completely on the table and acceptable so long as you are not already married. I don't think that you can find that anywhere in Scripture, because there's a lot that talks about our thoughts. There's a lot that deals with sexual sin. And what Jesus says next, because this is an issue with the eyes, I don't think it has anything to do with your marital status. I think that that's a misuse of Scripture, so you can do what you want. In the same way that the Pharisees did many things here and kind of gave these loose definitions in a way that benefited them. So this is not exclusive to men, nor is it exclusive to those who are married. Rather, this is an indictment on lust across the board. That's what this is. This is an indictment on the sin of lust in the heart that comes through the eyes. So he uses this phrase so we understand that lust, while it is stirred in the heart, it does begin through the eye gate. And he says this, the one who looks on someone to lust, who looks on a woman to lust. This is the issue here. So I want to reference our are quotations here. All right, so you have one on the inside that says, quote, on lust. I know, it's very, very thorough, and I'm just so descriptive. But these are just little headings I have so I can keep things straight in my own notes. I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's huge, but I do want to read a little bit of it to kind of continue with this thought, and then we'll get into verses 29 and 30. He goes on to, he says this is John Stott, again, who we've been looking at quite a bit in these last few weeks. What is particularly important to grasp in his equation of looking lustfully at a woman and committing adultery with her in the heart is it is the relation between the eyes and the heart which leads Jesus to the next two verses, 29 and 30. And he gives some very practical instruction about how to maintain sexual purity. The argument is this: if I look lustfully to commit adultery in the heart, in other words, if heart adultery is the result of eye adultery, the eyes of the heart stimulate the eyes of the flesh, then the only way to deal with the problem is at its beginning, which are our eyes. Okay, so this is kind of a simple just breakdown of thought and flow of logic. It goes to the heart of the issue. I'm not going to keep reading here. I had intended to, but I've already gone a little longer than I wanted on this one. But he gives an illustration of Job making this commitment and Job being able to fulfill that. Why? Because he guarded his eyes, and that was his whole purpose. I'll keep my heart pure by keeping my eyes off the things that they ought not to be on. So let's read verses 29 and 30 as Jesus demonstrates the whole eye issue here. And if your eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it's profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And then same thing, he demonstrates with the hand. In another passage, I think it might be Matthew 19 or 20, he demonstrates the same thing with the foot, and all of these same things. Sever it from you. I have another quote here, and I'm not sure that I gave this one to you guys. I do. It's on the back of that one, with that very lengthy one about lust. On the back, it says, quote, on the eyes. Yes, this is, and I'll read the entirety of this one because it's short. Again, John Stott, the command to get rid of the troublesome eyes, hand, and feet is an example of our Lord's use of dramatic figures of speech. What he was advocating was not a literal self-maiming, but a ruthless, don't miss this bold print, but a ruthless moral self-denial. Not mutilation, but mortification. This is the path to holiness as Jesus taught it. Mortification, or taking up our cross to follow Christ, means to reject sinful practices so resolutely that we die to them or put them to death. And again, we see that word mortify in Romans 8 and Colossians 3, and it literally does mean to put to death. It's not talking about maiming your body. There are those who have put this into practice and they've taken this, it's the word is asceticism, and it's where you hurt yourself, you deny yourself, even like food and water, to make yourself more holy. Colossians talks about that and how it doesn't do any good. This does not help us to be more holy. His issue is that we need to deal with the root, which is the heart, but the heart's corrupted through the eyes. And so there's a practical idea here. You die to self. You say no. You don't do it. And so this is really practical terms. Say no. Don't put yourself in a position to say yes. Cut off the sources of temptation, things like that. Just in today's day and age, not being alone with a device or not being alone with the whatever. And things like this to cut that off. Not a literal self-maiming, okay? Please don't take it that way. And if you're like, man, it sounds like he's saying that. Can we talk more about that? Happy to afterwards, but I got to keep moving. The same principle is true of the hand. If I'm struggling with sin of action of some kind, stop and cut off the opportunities. Don't cut off my literal hand. Okay, ultimately, let me say this. Jesus uses this language of cut it off to emphasize and address the seriousness of sin and to communicate, regardless of cost, we must root sin out of our lives. There is going to be a cost of self-denial, of mortification that must take place in our lives. And so this is what he's teaching here. Again, this is hyperbolic, but it is serious. It's very emphasized on the need for this, the weight of this. So let's keep going here. In verses 31 and 32, it hath been said. So this ties to the last one, but he's going to keep going because it's another thought in of itself. It hath been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced also committeth adultery. I know, this is like, everyone's like, this is why I came Sunday night, because I want to hear about these things, but we're just going through Matthew 5. So here we go. Let's just keep going. Let me say this first and foremost. God designed, and I'm going to skip so much here, but God designed marriage to be permanent. This was the design, okay? Now, there are many things that God designed that we fall short of, that we are not meeting the mark, but this was the original design. There's a fuller dialogue of this in Matthew 19, where Jesus has a dialogue with the Pharisees, and they come and they tempt him, and they say, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? They say, we want to be able to do it for any reason, just to end the marriage, just sever, have a divorce. And Jesus obviously found this very problematic, and when he responds to them, he points out that they're misquoting Deuteronomy 24, where they're pulling that from. They're misquoting the law once again. But further, he goes back to Genesis, to design, to origin, and says, this was not God's intent. It was never meant to be this way. And the only reason that Moses included it in the law, and this is, I'm paraphrasing a lot here from Matthew 19, where there's a fuller dialogue on this, he says, was because of the hardness of your heart. He said, because you were so hard-hearted that you were going to push on this issue, Moses said, fine, we'll make a provision for it. But then Jesus goes on to say, but it was never meant to be so. This was not the intent. And all that to say, marriage was intended to be a permanent union. The terms leave and cleave, obviously there's a departure from one and a combining with another. And then what Jesus says, let no man put asunder, let no man divide, that's permanence. It's intended to be a permanent, I'm looking for a word here and I can't think of it, a permanent union. There it is. So the Pharisees were preoccupied with grounds for divorce. What can we get away with? They were preoccupied with this. Jesus was preoccupied with the institution. He says, this is what God designed. You're preoccupied with breaking his design. And let me say this, because this is the theme of what's remaining in Matthew 5. All of the what can I get away with? What's the exception? Okay, that's the law, but how can I find a way around that that's convenient to me? That's everything that Jesus is dealing with here. Why? Because there were people who were teaching it. Remember several verses back where he says, whoever will break one of these commandments and teach men to do so, he's the least in the kingdom. Why? Because this is exactly what was happening. People who were like finding the loopholes and people who were misinterpreting and taking advantage of, to use the law to their own benefit and things of this nature. So always looking for that technicality, that loophole, that exception. That's what the Pharisees were preoccupied with. And again, Jesus says it was never meant to be this way. And he does give the allowance for an exception of fornication, but even then, it's not part of the design. That's not part of the intent. I have another long quote for you, and it's on that second insert. Boy, oh boy, I don't think I'm going to read it. But can I encourage you to read that? It's more thorough to the discussion than I'm able to get into tonight, and it's helpful just to think through some of this. It's quite lengthy. It's a front and back on the insert, 1.5 pages there. So if you get the chance, go ahead and read through that. But all this to say, this was never a part of God's design, and so Jesus is correcting the mindset of what are the allowances? What's the exception? What can I get away? No. It was not supposed to be like that. That's not what God designed this institution to be. Okay, let's keep going here because of the time. Verses 33 through 37, let's pick up there. So he says, again, so we're hearing another antithesis here. You've heard that it's been said by them of old time. So this has been a long-standing teaching. Thou shalt not forswear, which means to swear falsely. Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it's his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. You have no control over your life, but God does. This is what he's explaining here. Verse 37, but let your communication be, yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. That's a really, really interesting phrase, and we're going to come to it in a moment. But this next little heading of mine in verses 33 through 37 is this, honesty of speech. So he keeps referring back to the law, right? And you've heard it said. Here's how the law has been interpreted. Here's how it has been applied, or here's how it's been misapplied. This is what Jesus is explaining here. The words in this verse here are alluding to Exodus 20. Verse 7 says this, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. And then also Leviticus 19, verse 12 says this, and ye shall not swear by my name falsely. This is God. You shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Can I just take a time out to explain something here? In our day, and really even at that time, it was beginning to go this direction, we consider using God's name in vain. There, you swore with his name, like a curse word. Not like you made an oath, as he's describing here, but rather that you used his name in an ugly way, oh my God, or something like that. A couple things on that. One, that's not at all what the Bible teaches. I'm not telling you to say that. I'm just saying that's not what it teaches. We have really, really retaught the third commandment of not using the Lord's name in vain, but that's not what it teaches. But then secondly, I lost my train of thought, and it was really, really good. Oh my goodness. We'll come back to it. Using God's name in vain. Oh, right. God is a title. It's not a name. In the Old Testament, his name was Yahweh, as he revealed himself to Abraham and revealed himself to Moses as the I am. That was his name. His name was not God. That was his title. So again, just technicalities that help us to understand. We think of it as don't use God's name loosely, which I think is a good principle to live by. That's just not what the third commandment is teaching. When it says not to use his name in vain, it means don't make an oath by the name of the Lord, where you say, okay, as a kid, we used to say this all the time, I swear to God. That was something we would say. And if you're like, I don't even want to hear you say that, I won't say it again. I apologize. But that was something we would say when we were kids. Oh, I swear. And be like, well, what do you swear on? And you go ultimately from the pinky promise to a higher level promise to a higher level promise to on your mom and all the different things until somebody's like, okay, I think I believe you. We'll come back to it. But when he says anything more than yes, yes, and no, no comes of evil, it's an interesting thought here because it basically means you're all liars. You all know you're liars, and so you're trying to hold each other to higher swearing as you give your word because your word's not trustworthy. Here we go. The Pharisees, going back to the context of what he's saying here, the Pharisees were utilizing what they viewed as a technicality to the law. Instead of making an oath by God's name, and this is exactly what Jesus said, they wouldn't use an oath by his name. In fact, typically they wouldn't use his name. The religious crowd would generally not use the name of God. They would use some sort of a secondary thing. There's a Hebrew term that means the name, and they would often use that. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Nope, I'm not going to try because if I say the wrong Hebrew word, you're like, nope. And this is streamed tonight, so we won't do it. But they would just basically say the name because they didn't want to use his name because it was such a big deal, and there was so much reverence. But the Pharisees were making a loophole here. So this is what would happen. They would swear by something else, like heaven, as he gives an example, earth, Jerusalem, their own head, right? I swear on my own life. And they would do this, so then this way, if they didn't keep their oath, I didn't swear on God's name. I didn't violate the third commandment. This was a loophole, again, in their own mind. Now, there's no tricking God, right? Like, they might have viewed it as a loophole, and there are things we might do where we think, I'm finding the loophole, I'm finding the exception. And God's like, no, I know your heart, and that's what I want. That's the whole point of chapter 5 here. I want the heart. I want the purity of heart and intent in honesty. So they would, if they didn't keep their oath, they could fall back on, I didn't put God's name on it, therefore it's okay. I didn't use God's name in vain. But Jesus says, you're still using God's name in vain because heaven's his, earth is his, your head is his, Jerusalem is his, so you can't use any of these. They all belong to God. He says, just be honest. Say yes, yes, and say no, no, and be trustworthy and have integrity. So for the Pharisees, it wasn't about honesty. It was about checking a box. And I want to just take that thought process and apply it to us, whether it's about making oaths or something else. If our Christianity is wrapped up in something other than integrity, true intent, purity of heart, and in checking a box of some kind, I'm a Pharisee. If that's what my Christianity is wrapped up in, to where I am, I made the mark. Nope, that's enough. I checked that box. That's all I needed to do. That is a problem. And there's an issue there in the heart. And so this is what Jesus is trying to correct here in his teaching. It wasn't about honesty. It was just about checking off the boxes and pretending that they were something. But they were ultimately still using his name in vain. Man's technicalities don't fool God. And the application is really simple. It's this. Be honest. Be reliable. Keep your word. As he says in verse 37, just let your yes be yes and your no be no. James talks about this, not swearing by heaven or earth, but just be honest with your words. He does say in the back half here, when we exceed a simple yes or no, it's a result of evil. Let me read you another quote here. I think I have this one on the inside of your actual notes here. Let me look really quickly. Yeah, a quote on oaths, right at the top. Again, my creativity is just flourishing. It says this. Again, John Stott. And anything more than this, a yes, yes, or a no, no, Jesus added, comes from evil. Either evil from our heart and its fundamental deceit. Now, that's important to recognize because we do have inclination to deceive. And have you ever misrepresented truth and then immediately went, why did I do that? Why did I boast? Or why did I exaggerate? Why did I didn't want to look quite bad in front of someone, so they asked about this, and I skewed the truth just a hair. Have you ever done that? You don't have to raise your hand, but like think in your heart. I have, and I've walked away like immediately going, why did I do that? because your heart's very deceptive. And my heart in the moment was self-defense. Don't tell on yourself. Don't look bad in front of people. You're going to look stupid. You're going to look whatever. And so deception is very natural. So he says it's either from the evil of our heart and its fundamental deceit, or from the evil one whom Jesus described as a liar and the father of lies. And of course, that's the devil. He goes on to say this: if divorce is due to human hard-heartedness, falsely swearing, is due to human untruthfulness. Both were permitted by law. In a sense, there was this way that it was permitted, neither was commanded, and neither should be necessary. We should not have to swear by anything other than just giving our word. All right, we got to keep going here. These last two, non-retaliation and active love, are going to be the last two. This is verses 38 through 48. Let me read 38 through 42. Let's do this. He goes on to say, you've heard it has been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that you resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. For if any man will sue thee at law and take away thy coat, let him have thy cloak also. And whosoever shall compel thee to go a mile, go with him twain, or go with him two. Give to him that asks thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. Let me read you another quote, okay? This is a short one as well. I love these shorter ones. I feel like I'm making so much better time. This one on non-retaliation that begins with the word nowhere. He says this: nowhere is the challenge of the Sermon on the Mount, greater. Nowhere is the challenge greater. Nowhere is the distinctness of the Christian counterculture more obvious. Nowhere is our need of the power of the Holy Spirit, whose first fruit is love, more compelling. And that is in the area of not retaliating, which is so hard, and also actively loving people who hate us. And that's what these last two things are that we're going to deal with here. I'm going to aim for 6:15. I might go to like 6:17 or 18, but we're going to get through this, I promise. Non-retaliation, what we see in verses 38 through 42 here. Verse 38 is a quote from the law, okay? Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, Deuteronomy 19. But it's important contextually to note that an eye for an eye, please don't miss this, an eye for an eye was a civil law handled by judges. It was not a personal payback. Well, he did this, therefore the law allows me to, nope. The way that the law was dictated in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy was that there were judges who would say, what was the offense? Okay, let's make restitution. Let's correct this. Let's even it out, but only to the point that it should be, so it does not surpass what is just, what is fair. I remember when I was a kid, truly accidentally breaking one of my brother's toys. And my mom said, you're going to make restitution with him, and you're going to pay it back by giving him one of your toys that's of equal value. Well, the toy that I broke of his was like high value for him, which meant I had to give him a high value toy of mine, which meant that I did not have a good spirit about this. And I gave it to him because my mom made me. But I was so upset. But what this is teaching here is that just like my mom was in that situation, there's oversight. Okay, this is not just I'm making payback here. Eye for an eye, you slap me, I'm about to slap you back. No. There's a way that this is to be handled, and this was civil law. The purpose of this law, again, was to limit the extent of legal retribution. Justice could be served, and revenge would be restrained. Because what is natural to our human hearts, to our human lives, is to pay it back and then some. Okay? In sports, whenever I felt like I got cheap-shotted, someone came in, and I like to play soccer. I was never that good, but if someone came in and they were intentionally clipping my ankle with their cleat, hitting the outside of your ankle bone, it hurt so bad, I promise you I was going to get them back more times than they got me. Why? Because human nature is, I'm not going to make it even, I'm going to make it even and then some. And the point of this law, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, whatever it is, was to make sure it wasn't going past that point. That was the point here, civil law. I hope I've made this case, and all of you think less of me for how I played soccer. Don't worry, I can't even run anymore, so it's fine. Here we go. An eye for an eye meant only an eye for an eye, rather than two eyes for an eye, or so on and so forth. This way, there couldn't be grudge-filled vengeance, which is very natural to us. It would seem, by the way that Jesus approaches this, that the interpreters of the law at that time, the scribes, the Pharisees, maybe even some before them, people of old time, because he keeps saying, you've heard it said of old, it seems that they extended this law of just retribution from courts to personal relationships. They took it beyond what it was intended to be and said, you can act in a personal relationship because it's commanded in the law. get someone back, make them pay back, get your revenge to some extent, was the way that this was apparently being described, because the way that Jesus goes through personal issues and personal offenses and says how we are to respond to them as his followers. And so they had extended this from courts to personal relationships, which justified personal revenge and really even made it seem as if it was commanded by law. Now, if they had been true to the law, they would know that Leviticus 19:18 says you cannot hold a grudge and get someone back for it. I'm paraphrasing. Obviously, it doesn't say it quite like that. But you can't hold a grudge. And so this is, if they would have just been true to the law, they would know that they were teaching it incorrectly, intentionally, but it was to personal benefit. I can pay people back. Why? Because I want to. Because now I feel justified within the law. So now that we know what the law forbade, vengeance, what was being promoted, and what was the law called for? Let me read another quote here. Hopefully I have this one in your. Yes, what Jesus affirmed. All right, let's look at that, and then we're going to look at another right under it. What Jesus affirmed in this antithesis, and by the way, each of these you've heard it said, but I say unto you, that's an antithesis. He's saying, here's the opposite. Here's what you heard. Let me correct that. Let me add to that. Let me straighten that out. So that's what I mean when I'm reading him saying antithesis. When Jesus affirmed in the antithesis, or what he did, was rather that this principle, though it pertains to law courts and the judgment of God, is not applicable to our personal relationships. Please don't miss this line right here. These, our personal relationships, are to be based on love, not justice. Now, don't freak out because you think, what about a legal situation? We'll come to that. Our duty to individuals who wrong us is not retaliation, but acceptance. But the acceptance of injustice without revenge or redress. As he says in verse 39, don't resist the one who is evil, or who don't resist evil against you. Let me keep going here. As he says, this acceptance of justice, don't resist evil, in verse 39. We'll go on and read the very next quote. What we are forbidden to resist is not evil as such, evil in the abstract, nor the evil one, meaning the devil. He's not saying don't resist him. Of course, we're commanded to resist the devil, but an evil person, one who is evil, or the man who wrongs you. Jesus does not deny that he is evil. He asks us, he asks us neither to pretend that he's other than he is, nor to condone his behavior, his evil behavior. What he does not allow is that we retaliate. Do not take revenge on someone who wrongs you. So Jesus goes on to use these illustrations of real-life situations that they were dealing with as Jews of that day. So he uses these illustrations to teach this principle, to teach this true use of the commandment. So he says this: if someone smites you, meaning one of two things, they either literally hit you with a backhand, or they insult you. Because a backhand in that culture was and still is an insult. And at that time, if someone put a big enough insult verbally, you could take them to court for it. Remember we talked about that last week, and the whole idea of having anger with someone. If you say raka and you really disparage or slander someone's character, they could take you to court and sue you for what you said about them. So this was a different culture than our own. Generally speaking, I don't think we can sue people for what they say about us. Unless they're inciting violence, or I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I know the whole law. All right. Anyway, so he says if someone smites you, so if they backhand you or they insult you in some way, don't seek payback. Don't make it even. Don't retaliate. He goes on to say, if someone takes you to court, don't countersue them. In fact, well, we'll come back to the double portion in a moment here, but don't countersue them. I did put a little thought here. This is not a quote from Stott. This is a quote from me, which means it's not going to be great. But just because retribution is our right does not mean that we need to exercise it. Just because, I have provision to make the payback. No. Jesus is saying don't retaliate. Don't make it even. As my follower, don't make them pay it back. He goes on to say, if someone compels your service in some way, they want you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. He says this: don't resist and don't try to get them back. I do want to give a little context to that one because that doesn't apply to us. Someone doesn't really compel us to go a mile with them. But at that time, the Roman soldiers could come up to a citizen and essentially be like, I need you to carry my stuff all the way to such and such a point, like at great inconvenience, and there was nothing you could do because they were literally, they were controlled by the Roman Empire at that time. So there's a lot you could do. And you pretty much, you would want to do the bare minimum. What Jesus was encouraging is not only do that, but go further than what they compelled of you. I don't know how that plays out for us in real life. If someone greatly inconveniences you and they're taking advantage in some way, Jesus is basically saying don't retaliate. Don't make them pay it back. And so however that might translate for us, in modern day. I know that there's different ways we could think of that. He does go on to give a fourth illustration, which is a little more unique. It's in verse 42. He says, "Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee, turn him not away." This doesn't sound like someone who's hurting you, like the other ones, or someone who has slapped you, insulted you, forced you into a labor that you didn't want to have to do. But rather, my understanding of this is the person who has already offended you, and then now they have a need, give to them. Do not pay them back because now you have the power. Does that make sense? Have you ever been in a position where someone really, really wronged you, and then they needed you, and you were like, let's go. Like, all right, now I get to control you. I've been there. And what he's teaching now is don't do that. They want to borrow of you, let them. They ask something of you, give it to them. But you don't know what they did to me. He does. And he's saying, don't retaliate when you have the power to do so. Be gracious, be kind, be Christ-like. It's a difficult thing. And again, this is why it's the ultimate form of difficulty in this sermon, because none of us want to act this way in our human nature. Don't withhold something from someone who's done you wrong when you have the power to do so. In each of these four situations, Jesus says our Christian duty is to so completely forbear revenge that we even allow the evil person to double the injury. And that's what he says, right? If he hits you on the one cheek, turn to him the other. Don't pay him back, even to the point that he might double it up. If he sues you for one thing, he's going to sue you for another. Let him have it. If someone asks you at great inconvenience to go and do this whatever, double it up. And so this is a really difficult thing to act on, to enact and live out, but this is what Jesus is requiring of his disciples. Let me say this. When we're able to withstand insults, personal attacks, and abuse with no thought or effort for revenge or to make things even, we reflect the person of Jesus. And here's why. Because Jesus was constantly attacked, right? He was called a drunk. He was called an illegitimate child. It was not just implicit but explicit that there was illegitimacy in his family. He was called a blasphemer. He was called the tool of Satan. Remember? They said, he's only doing these miracles because Satan is empowering him to do it. This wild accusations. But he never paid anything back. In fact, as the Roman soldiers beat him and they taunted him, what did he do? He didn't answer. He didn't say anything back. And that's a difficult thing to do. I'm weighing when I give a personal illustration here of when I did not live this out. I'm going to forbear. And it's not a good one, so not a great look on me. But when we're able to withstand these things and not make an effort for revenge, we're reflecting Jesus and his character and his person, because this is what he did. Here's another quote here. To sum up the teachings of this antithesis, Jesus was not prohibiting the administration of justice. And please hear this, because I don't want it to be to the point that I'm teaching an error where someone can literally be physically assaulting someone. You're like, well, I just got to let them do it. It's what Jesus said. No, he's not saying don't allow justice to prevail. God is very just. But Jesus was not prohibiting the administration of justice, but rather forbidding us to take the law into our own hands. An eye for an eye, again, is a principle of justice belonging to the court of law. In personal life, we must be rid not only of all retaliation in word and deed, and here's the hardest part because it goes back to the heart, but of all animosity of spirit. See, I might not say anything back and I might not do anything back, but inside, I'm hating you. That's just as much of a problem. That's just as much of a violation. And he's saying, this does not belong in a follower of Christ. We can, and going on with the quote, we can and must commit our cause to the good and righteous judge, as Jesus himself did. But it is not for us to seek or desire any personal revenge. We must not repay injury, but suffer it, and so overcome evil with good. Each of these examples, just to go on to the last thought here, each of these examples demonstrates actions of love for the one who hates us, the one who would curse us, the one who would despitefully use us, as he puts it. And this leads us to our last thought here, this active love in verses 43 through the end. So he says this, you've heard that it's been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy, but I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you. Now he's describing what he just talked about. Do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. So he's just given these real life illustrations that they would identify with, and he's saying, bless these people, pray for these people, love these people. Well, that's not something I want to hear, but this is what the teaching is. Let's see here. And those who would persecute you. Verse 45, that ye may be the children of your Father which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise, and I can hear my mic, I'm so sorry. He maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love them which love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the publicans, that's the tax collectors, do not the publicans do the same? And if you salute, meaning you're respectful, you're kind to, you salute your brethren only, what do you more than others? Do not even the publicans so? Be ye therefore perfect, as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. Let me just give a few thoughts on this and we'll wrap it up. This last you've heard it said that Jesus gives in verse 43 here, it shows two things. One, it shows this convenient omission from the law because he says, you've heard it said that you should love your neighbor. What are we to love our neighbor as? As yourself. And that was omitted from the teaching. It's in the Old Testament law. It's in Leviticus 19, verse 18. But there is an omission here of love your neighbor as yourself because that takes the degree of love much higher. We naturally love ourselves very, very much, right? It's human nature that we're going to do good to ourselves as much as we can. And so he points out this omission, but then much, much worse is there's a major addition. And that's that they say, and hate your enemy. That's found nowhere in the Old Testament. That's not in any principle, any precept, any command of the Old Testament, of the law and the prophets. And so this was, not only was there a convenient omitting of something, but there was something much worse that they added to God's word. And so just like the misinterpretations where we see with anger and we see with lust and we see with adultery and we see with giving our word and we see with not retaliating, all the other things that people might have found loopholes for, the misinterpretations, the loopholes, the misuses, whatever, this omission and addition served as an agenda for the ones teaching it. And Jesus is just scorching the Pharisees here. Because again, going back to, he says, if you're teaching people to do this, you are the least in my kingdom. Because you have undermined the authority of my law and what it's intended to be and what I wanted it to be and how it's supposed to be utilized. And so they justified to their own agenda hate or disdain towards those who they considered enemies. And again, this is found nowhere in the Old Testament for them to support that teaching. It would seem that there were some who had taught that they were teaching this almost by implication, and this is just a speculation, but if you love one, consequently, or by implication, you're now hating the other. It's kind of like, well, you love your neighbor. That means you get to hate your enemy. And that's probably the way that was being put forward. I don't know for sure. That's a speculation. But again, this is addition either way because it's not found in the Old Testament law. Further, we see in the parable of the Good Samaritan where there's then, oh, but what about the justification? The lawyer asks him, but who's my neighbor? Right? He comes and says, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, love Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And then but who's my neighbor? What can I get away with? And this is the heart of this whole issue is what is the exception? And then Jesus, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, he describes their neighbor as someone who is an enemy, right? Someone who they would naturally hate, someone who they had actual literal prejudice against, racial issues. And so it was just a whole lot that he's teaching here. And again, I wish we had more time. So going through all of this, Jesus corrected the false teaching and commanded the opposite. He said, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who would use and abuse you. This was an astounding new doctrine because it had been a long-standing teaching. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. Well, when I get to pick and choose who my enemy is, this is a pretty great law. This is convenient to my own agenda. This is convenient to kind of satisfying my own hate in my heart and justifying it all the more as a part of God's law. And so this was a new teaching. And again, it was truly countercultural because no one lives this way. No one naturally lives this way. So you're like, you cursed me, let me bless you. You hate me, let me pray for you. You use and abuse me, let me wish well to you. That's just, people don't live this way outside of Christ and his Spirit. So to describe this, it's active and godly love, what he's describing here. It's seeking to do good to those who would do the opposite toward us. He says that anyone, he goes on to say in the last couple of verses, anyone can show standard love, right? He says the publicans do this. They salute others. They love those who love them. And the publicans, just as a point of context, were hated. They were thought of as the lowest of the low. They betrayed their people to go collect taxes for the Romans, and they're like the worst people in their mind. And he says, they're doing this. Are you not trying to be a little bit better than that? And so he's making a point that you're really, really setting the bar very low here, and he's raising the bar very high by interpreting the law properly. The point is this: a disciple of Jesus is to be entirely different than everyone else. We are to be entirely countercultural. He goes on to say in verse 48, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. The children of God, let me capture that thought in this way. The children of God are to reflect the character of God. And actively loving those who hate you is the greatest way to embody that character. Okay, the greatest way to demonstrate and to actualize that character is to love those who hate you. And while we should be loving everyone, as we're commanded, especially those who hate, the best way that we can let our light shine, as he says back in verse 12 or 13, or wherever it was, the best way that we can let our light shine, I think it's verse 17, is to actively love others, including those who don't love us in return and even hate us and are abusive toward us. This is the best way that we can shine our light for Christ as his disciples. Let me read one last quote here and we'll be finished. John Stott says this: looking back over all 6 antitheses, it has become clear what the greater righteousness is to which Christians are summoned. This is what you and I are called to. A deep inward righteousness of the heart where the Holy Spirit has written God's law. It's new fruit. It's a new fruit exhibiting the newness of the tree. New life, burgeoning from new nature. It's growing. I'm pretty sure that's what that means. So we have no liberty. Again, this guy using words I don't know. So we have no liberty to try to dodge or duck the lofty demands of the law. Law dodging is a Pharisaic hobby. And just, if we can just take that thought and let it ruminate for a moment, to find the loopholes, to check the boxes, to find the technicalities. This is what it means to be a Pharisee. I don't think anybody starts out intending to be a Pharisee, but it's easy to find ourselves there because we want to justify things in our heart, and we want to be able to do what seems natural to us and what feels good to us. And he's saying that when you dodge the law, when you find the loopholes and the technicalities, you're being a Pharisee. What's characteristic of Christians is a keen appetite, it should be characteristic, is a keen appetite for righteousness, hungering and thirsting after it continually. And this righteousness, whether it's expressed in purity, honesty, or charity, love, will show to whom we belong. This shows that we, as he says, even as your Father. This shows that we belong to God. We are his children. Our Christian calling is to imitate not the world, but the Father. And it is by this imitation of him that Christian counterculture ultimately becomes visible and can be seen when we live in this way. And so I wish that we could have done more for each of these. There's so much in each one, but at the heart of it all is this. There's got to be pure intent of the heart, righteousness of the heart, and not just living to the letter of the law, because the letter, there were always ways that they would find exceptions and ways to justify and misrepresent, or only read this part of the law and omit this part, and therefore I am fulfilling it. And all of these things that we saw as he illustrates, and there's just so much there. But we'll stop, and I appreciate you being here tonight. Next week, we'll get into chapter 6. It continues really on the same line of thought. A Christian's religion ought to not be hypocritical, but should be real. And this is where he gets into when you pray, don't do it like a Pharisee. When you give, don't do it like a Pharisee. And chapter 6 is my favorite chapter of this sermon, so I'm looking forward to it. Hope you have a great rest of the night. Don't forget there's coffee and refreshments in the lobby if you want them. Take care. Thank you.